As a country, should we be concerned about securing our border or caring for refugees? And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, should we be advocating that our country secure our borders or care for refugees? Yes, please, yes. This channel addresses both political and non-political topics because the both and life is all of life. It's not sacred and secular, it's both. And so, because this is the first episode to specifically address a political topic, I want to give some big picture comments before we dive into this particular topic for this episode. With political topics especially, I would ask you and plead with you, please listen all the way to the end. Don't just listen until you get uncomfortable and then turn it off. At least consider the whole thing. Otherwise, you're not part of the both and life. You're still in the either or culture. There are lots of financial and power incentives for turning things into either ors. It's lucrative. It gets attention. It gains power. And anger sells. Demonizing your political opponent appears to be the strategy of choice in our culture. But it's completely out of bounds for anyone who follows Jesus. Now, I'll be the first to admit I am not a political science major. That is not my area of expertise. And so it's very possible that there have been studies made that prove that demonizing the opponent, making them look like an idiot, like they've never had a cogent thought in their life, that actually is good strategy politically. Although I kind of doubt it. I suspect it has more to do with money and advertising than it does with actual political strategy. Because what I know for sure is that on a one-on-one basis, that's terrible strategy. I'm never going to convince someone to listen to my arguments if I first tried to tell them that they're an idiot and that they follow the devil. That will never be successful. And so it would surprise me if what is terrible strategy on a grassroots level is actually fantastic strategy on a national level. But regardless, it's not okay for those of us who claim to follow Jesus. And I'm fully aware that we are so polarized that to step into these waters is in fact a dangerous thing. There's a reason why in wars the area between the two trenches is referred to as no man's land, because you can die out there. You can get shot at from both sides. So I'm going into this with my eyes open, even though I'm not really expecting dramatic pushback. But I know that there's going to be folks who feel very strongly on this and any political topic on both sides who are my friends. I know this already. But see, the both and life has to address topics that need to be addressed. Jesus called us to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. Peacekeepers think that the best path forward is just to never address anything that might ruffle someone's feathers. But that's not peacemaking. That won't solve anything in the long run. And Jesus is all about solving things in the long run, even beyond this life. Again, my expertise is not on political solutions. I'm not trying to become a policy expert and get appointed to a cabinet. I know that my expertise is in relational unity, but I also know that this affects all of us. And furthermore, I'm fully aware that my audience as this channel gets started is almost entirely followers of Jesus. But if you aren't a follower of Jesus, it's my hope that I'll be able to phrase things in such a way that you won't find this offensive. Maybe you'll even find it interesting and decide to keep watching. So if that's you, I would love your feedback. How could I make this even more palatable for you who do not claim to follow Jesus, even though I'm especially and often referring to Jesus and the scriptures that he honored. So, on the topic of border security and immigration, today is going to be very much an overview, addressing some of the big picture questions and hitting the big topics that I'm aware of that are both and that impact our impasse in this entire issue. And I really am longing for your feedback. That will determine whether we do a deeper dive in a subsequent episode or whether that's just not that interesting and not really my lane for the both and life. So please let me know if you would like to go deeper, because there are plenty of places where we can go deeper than we're going to go today. So the first big picture question: is national security a political issue or a biblical issue? Is it an issue for those who are working in government, or is it an issue for those who follow Jesus? Yes, it's not one or the other. There have been theologians for centuries who have put forth what's called a just war theory, ways in which when evil has to be stopped and it has to be encountered, there are times where that is appropriate, and we don't have to put our faith on a shelf to acknowledge that. And when it comes to national borders, well, a whole lot of the Old Testament addresses exactly that. And then finally, if you're one of the newsletter readers for our J17 Ministries weekly newsletter, just this week, Steve Trost, a friend of mine, an affiliate in the ministry, has put together an entire consortium of congregations who are addressing those directly impacted by the new policies that are coming, and those that are affected by possible deportation, legal issues, those that are being mistreated. He's got 30 congregations in the Southwest United States, 20 more already south of the border, so that there can be a holistic care for families. But in his article, he acknowledges that Jesus and the New Testament are very clear that we are to respect governmental authority. We're not overthrowing it. Jesus didn't, and he could have. His followers didn't, and they could have. In fact, it's all about a both and, that we're to respect and pray for those in authority over us, honoring that governmental authority is instituted by God. So yes, we can pay attention to national security and not believe that if we care about refugees, we have to toss that out. Next big picture question: is immigration multifaceted? And while that's not phrased as a both and question, there's so many both ands in response to that I can't just do one of them. Should we be concerned about those who are in our country already without legal papers, or those who want to enter our country? The answer is yes. And we shouldn't assume that the same policies need to be put into place to deal with both groups. Those are two very different groups, and they need to be treated very differently. Is the immigration issue concerning both declared and undeclared immigrants? Yes. There are those who are refugees or immigrants to our country who are here legally, who have followed a vetting process and who are absolutely authorized to be here. And asylum seekers are those who cross the border and then they declare that I'm here in order to seek asylum. That isn't illegal. They're the ones who say, here's what I'm doing. So again, that's not an illegal immigration situation. And in fact, are we concerned about refugees or immigrants? Yes, it's a continuum. I served on a refugee ministry board for a couple of years here in Tucson, and so I learned a lot that I didn't already know. Refugees are those who are forced to leave their country. They don't want to have to leave the country, but they have no choice if they're going to stay alive. And to be a legally documented, recognized refugee is an incredibly vetted process. It can take 10 years or more. Asylum seekers are the next step down. They also would prefer but can't return to their homeland, but maybe their situation hasn't been officially recognized yet. They cross the border, declare that they're seeking asylum, and then the court process has to determine if that asylum is going to be granted. Next on the continuum are immigrants, those who maybe want to and possibly could return to their home country, but they're seeking a better life someplace else. And there can be very legitimate reasons for that as well. And then finally, migrants may be those who want to go back and forth, possibly for employment or other purposes. It's a continuum, and we can't refer to everybody as if they're exactly the same. Is it ever appropriate to flee your country illegally and cross into another one? Well, there's pretty good biblical precedent for that. Mary and Joseph were told by God to leave their country, flee to Egypt, in order to protect the life of Jesus. So let's have a little more nuance when we talk about this whole issue, especially those of us who claim to follow Jesus. Next big question. Are border seekers seeking to do us harm, seeking a better life, or just seeking to live? Yes, there are those in all three situations. We can do a deeper dive if there's interest in this, but there are statistics to back up the fact that the number of people who are in our country without papers, who then are arrested for future crimes, is actually less than the general population. And that makes sense, because if you know that you can get deported for possibly breaking the speed limit, you're going to be extra careful and work hard to stay under the radar. One of the issues that is in the news a lot these days about border crossings and securing the border has to do with the flow of illegal drugs. Should we be concerned about the drugs that cross into the country, or the demand for drugs that incentivizes those to bring drugs illegally into our country? Yes. In fact, it would make sense to me that until we address the demand issue, those who are seeking those drugs, we're always going to have problems with drugs crossing illegally into our country. Living the both-and life means acknowledging that there are both either-ors and both-ands. Not everything is a both-and. Justice and injustice, that's an either-or. We can't just say, well, whatever, both are viable options. We're to fight against injustice as followers of Jesus and as citizens of a nation. And because we have turned so many political issues like this one into an either-or, we've created a whole bunch of injustices that have to be spoken against. And so I want to end this overview episode by just naming some of those. Naivete, that everybody's a nice person and we shouldn't really be concerned, well, that's not okay. We should know from human experience, and we certainly know from the words of Scripture, that there is an evil one who seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. And while our enemy, according to the Bible, is never another human being, the evil one seeks out human beings to do his bidding, to steal, to kill, and destroy. We're not supposed to make peace with the enemy. We're supposed to resist him. And so that's absolutely appropriate. And so to just have a naivete and ignore the reality of evil in our world, that's not okay. The word xenophobia literally refers to the fear or the hatred of something foreign or someone foreign, someone unknown or something unknown. It's not appropriate to say that everybody who's concerned about building a wall hates all foreigners and is racist. That's not okay. But it has to be acknowledged that there are those who seem to have a fear of the unknown, maybe even a dislike or stronger for foreigners. And that also is not okay. Ironically, I was planning to film this episode this morning, and it didn't work out that way. And so I ended up going to worship, and the church that I worshiped in this morning was hosting the African Children's Choir. And it brought back some of those precious memories of spending a few weeks, a couple of different times in Africa and meeting children just like these. When you've spent time with someone, it's pretty hard to demonize them. And that's not true only of foreigners, but that's true of people on both sides of the political aisle. It's not okay for there to be fear or hatred of someone foreign or some foreign belief system, and that has to be called out. Much of our policy when it comes to deportation splits up families. And for those who are followers of Jesus and pro-family, that's not okay. We can't make peace with policies that destroy families and guarantee poverty for generations for children and or a spouse that's left behind. We certainly can do better than that. Bearing false witness against our neighbor, well, that made the Big Ten. And so to acknowledge a certain documented circumstance of someone who's in the country illegally and has committed a crime, and do that in such a way that it kind of covers the entire people group, that's not okay. It's not okay to have a veiled or unveiled racism that just paints an entire people group because one person in that group did something that we would all agree should not be done. Bearing false witness against our neighbor has to be stopped. And for those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus, we should be the ones at the front of the line saying that's not appropriate and we will not put up with it. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the refugee process is so involved, requires an entire generation sometimes to grow up in a refugee camp in tents someplace where there's very little services, there probably is no education, and oftentimes life is unimaginably unbearable. And so then when they finally are approved as a refugee in whichever country they come to, in the case of coming to the United States, maybe it's after 10 or 15 or more years, and they come over here with some promises for a new life in a country that they would rather not be in. And then to have just a blanket policy that pulls the rug out from under them so that there's no funding for housing or any kind of funding to support them when they get here, that's not okay. As a nation founded on immigration, that's just not okay to treat our neighbors who are in need that way. And both our nation and those of us who are people of faith need to say so. That's happening right now, and it's not okay. I'll end this episode with this hypothesis, this thought. I wonder if the best way to fight illegal immigration would be to spend some time and energy for legal immigration. Let's put some effort there because there are people in need and we need to care. Thank you for watching. Again, I would love your feedback in the comments or through any of the different mechanisms that are available. I'd love to know whether there's interest in a deeper dive into this topic. I hope that you'll subscribe and make some comments, and through social media or other mechanisms, share it with some others. If you think that the both and life is worth living, then let some other people know about it so that they can take advantage of it as well. And next week will be determined a lot by your feedback. There are solutions to this kind of an issue. And so we'll take a look at those and we'll shape the deeper dive based on the feedback that you provide. Thanks again.